How's it going, everybody? Eddie with Player 2 Gaming here, giving you my review of Destiny's newest expansion, The House of Wolves. So I'm going to be real, I haven't really played Destiny in a couple of months. I played it a ton at launch. In fact, it was my most anticipated game of last year. However, I got really tired of the same grind for the same gear. Also, the dart below really left me uninterested. I felt like I got a snack rather than a full meal that I paid $20 for. It wasn't really much of an expansion. So I wasn't really that excited leading up to the House of Wolves, and I didn't follow its development nearly as closely as I did before the dart below. I'm happy to say that my preconceptions were wrong. The House of Wolves is awesome. It beats the dart below by a long shot, and in some ways, the story is even better than the main game that we were given in September. Story has never really been something Destiny is regarded for. In fact, the game's lack of story is a large contributor to the divisiveness among the gaming community regarding Destiny. However, Bungie makes an attempt in the House of Wolves to try to change the perception of Destiny's story, and in many ways they succeed. Don't twist my words, this is no Pulitzer Prize winner, but I did find the story interesting and engaging, and for the first time since Destiny's launch, I found myself firing up the story missions because I wanted to see the next development in the plot, rather than just wanting to get my gear and move on. This is thanks in part to the great voice acting found in the House of Wolves. Petra Venj, who's the Queen's emissary and the main NPC this time around, keeps in constant dialogue with you throughout the story, offering lots of exposition about the Reef and the Fallen. April Stewart, most known as the voice of Sharon Marsh in South Park, offers her talents voicing Petra, and although the South Park fan in me chuckled hearing Stan's mom while I was killing Fallen, she does a great job.
We're doing good work out there, Guardian.
Couple this with the work of secondary NPCs such as Fallen vendor Varix the Loyal, and the House of Wolves offers players with an immersive world that doesn't require them to read up on Grimoire cards to feel engaged. Furthermore, there are brand new areas in the House of Wolves, most notably the new social space found on the Reef. Filled with many NPCs to talk to and a great new soundtrack, the Vestian Outpost is a welcome addition to the game, and I find myself traveling here far more than the tower. Bungie's dedication to a strong narrative is apparent as soon as you start up the House of Wolves. Like the dart below, you can view an optional cinematic that introduces the premise of this expansion. However, you're also introduced by another cinematic that's a lot more artsy, and it feels a lot more different than other things that have been in Destiny, and it definitely makes the plot feel more important and contextual. The House of Wolves, once subject under the rule of the Awoken Queen, have betrayed her, and their leader Skolas has named himself the Kell of Kells. Though a simple story, the journey of tracking down Skolas is interesting, and I applaud Bungie for taking steps towards refining Destiny's plot. It's nothing to write home about, but I have no real complaints. Obviously, being an expansion, the House of Wolves has a lot of new content to Destiny. A lot more than the dart below had, actually. Before we get into that new content, there's one big update that this brings that is worth talking about. Bungie has now implemented a new sort of upgrading system to your gear. If you're like me or any other Destiny player, gear is super important to you. And it's something that felt disappointing when the dart below came out. The fact that the DLC came around and all of the gear we worked so hard for was basically moot. This is no longer the case. Now, every single piece of armor and every single weapon that's legendary and exotic, whether it's from the dart below or from the main game, can be upgraded to the new level cap of 34. This is great for two reasons. First off, every level 34 Guardian is going to look different now. Not everybody's going to have the same armor set, and you're going to have a little bit more diversity when you're in the social spaces. But secondly, and most importantly, when you play Destiny, you have a story that goes with your gear. You have sort of a connection with your favorite guns and your favorite pieces of armor. Now you can keep those without feeling like you're underpowered. Now I'm going to be able to use my vision of Confluence and feel just as awesome as the day I got it during the base game. Now to get into some of the new stuff that they bring with this expansion. First off, let's talk about the story missions. I already mentioned that I think the story itself was good enough reason to keep playing, but thankfully the story missions themselves are a lot of fun and none of them feel too repetitive. I like the new enemy types. The wolves are really cool and the final boss fight is great. I mean, it's really exciting and it feels really epic. It was also really cool to see the different environments that you go through during the story. Most notably, the Vault of Glass actually makes a cameo in a really cool way, and it makes you feel almost nostalgic that you're going back into the Vault of Glass to do something new. Also, I really like the new toys that they give you to play with. You get something called the Scorch Cannon. It's sort of like the Sword of Crota, in the sense that you kill an enemy and it drops it. You pick this weapon up and completely destroy. It's a shoulder-mounted rocket launcher, basically, that reminds me a lot of the Incendiary launcher from Halo 4. This thing will just completely wipe out waves of Fallen, and it's tons of fun to play with. Also, Bungie has finally implemented a new weapon type. There's a new secondary weapon called a sidearm, and you get one when you're playing the main story. This thing is awesome. It's kind of like a little pistol that has a really high rate of fire and a pretty high impact. It's really versatile. You can use it in a lot of different situations. I found myself using it in Crucible just as much as I did in the story. But with the story being so Fallen-centric and Fallen having a lot of arc shields, this thing was really helpful, and it just kicks ass, honestly. There is, however, one glaring issue I have with the story missions. Obviously, Destiny is a community-based game, and it's always more fun with a fire team. But if you're like myself and you play kind of at weird hours whenever you can, and you also don't really have a whole lot of friends that play Destiny, you have to solo the missions. In the Dark Below and in the main game, I felt like I could do that with some sort of efficiency, and it didn't feel like I was missing out on anything. This isn't the case with the House of Wolves. Not only does it feel a bit empty if you're playing by yourself during these story missions, but it's also way harder. You can tell that Bungie made these story missions with group play in mind. So I felt very frustrated when I was playing by myself and dying like 10 times per mission, and I also felt a little left out. I know that's part my fault for not really finding people to play with, but I think that Bungie should have kept solo players in mind when making these story missions. With a new expansion comes a new strike. This time the strike feels really different. I think that the mechanics of the strike differ a lot from what we've been given before, as this strike feels a lot more fast-paced, and it's set in a pursuit style. You're actually fighting the boss the entire time, but you'll fight him a little bit, he'll run away, fight him a little bit, he'll run away, and he eventually ends up getting in a fallen tank at one point, and that part is awesome. But I had a lot of fun with this strike. Be prepared, this strike is hard, and with this expansion, Bungie has now made the Nightfalls level 32. These things are hard, especially this strike. There's not a whole lot of cover, but it's really fast-paced and it keeps you on your toes. I really have a good time with this strike.
Prison of Elders welcomes you. Do not fail, Guardian.
In this expansion, we're not given a raid, but don't let that freak you out. What we are given is something new, different, and something I in some ways like even better than the raids. We're given the Prison of Elders. What this basically is an arena type game where you play 5 rounds. You play 4 rounds of each type of enemy that's in the game. You play a round of Fallen, a round of Hive, a round of Vex, and a round of Cabal. And at the end, you are given a final boss that you fight. Now, at the very end of all of this, you can go and open up a chest that gives you tons of loot. This is a really difficult game mode, but it's a ton of fun. I had such a great time with this. The environments are crazy, as you can probably see here on the screen. And the enemies keep coming and coming while you have to do different sorts of objectives. I had a ball with this. In fact, I'd say this is probably the most fun I've had with Destiny since I played the Vault of Glass. I wasn't a huge Crota's End fan, personally. The Prison of Elders is also very robust and diverse in the way it's set up. There's the base Prison of Elders that you play at level 28, and you get the chest at the end that yields some pretty cool rewards. But then there's also the level 32, 34, and 35 Prison of Elders. Unlike the base one, these don't matchmake. These take a lot of team coordination, much like a raid. And they're also extremely difficult. However, at the end, you end up getting materials that you can take back to the Vestian Outpost and get some very unique and high-level armor and weapons. There's also treasure keys. It's kind of like a new currency that's in the game. With each treasure key, you can open up a chest. The first time you run through a Prison of Elders, they give you the chest for free. But all the subsequent times that you end up doing that mission, you have to have one of these treasure keys in order to yield a reward. It makes it pretty cool because it seems that people aren't going to be spamming the Prison of Elders like they did the raid. People are going to play them when they have these treasure keys, and it's going to make it feel a lot more fresh and a lot more exciting when you do end up being able to run through the Prison of Elders and get your rewards. Overall, I think the Prison of Elders is one of the coolest things that's been added to Destiny since its launch, and I've just been having a ball with it. On the Crucible side of things, we're obviously given 3 maps, being a new expansion. The Widow's Court is probably my favorite of the 3. This one feels so much different than any other thing that we've ever been given in Destiny. Part of this is because it's in a completely new environment. Instead of being in old Russia, this is the first Earth environment that is in Europe. It's actually in a broken down European cathedral. The map is very vertical, and I found myself, in fact, taking in a lot of the sights rather than playing the damn Crucible game. But it's a really, really sick map. The other maps are pretty cool too. I do enjoy them. Though I admit I haven't had a whole lot of time to play them, as I seem to be getting Widow's Court a lot in the playlists. Hopefully they'll be able to change the playlist diversity so that we can check out the maps equally, but for now, I have no real complaints that has been Widow's Court because this map is seriously awesome. As you've probably heard, the most notable Crucible edition is the Trials of Osiris, the first Crucible endgame that's really been put in Destiny. Every weekend, you're going to be able to play the Trials of Osiris. What this is a 3v3 elimination game that is ridiculously high leveled. Bungie has made it clear that the Trials of Osiris is not for any sort of new player. If you're not very good at Crucible, you can go and play another game, because Trials of Osiris is difficult, competitive, and not very forgiving. The basic premise is that you are given a pass to go into the Trials of Osiris, and you can win 9 times and you can lose 3 times. If you lose 3 times, you're kicked out and you have to go get a new passage, which costs some serious coin. In order to get any sort of reward, you have to win consecutive matches. In fact, if you want to yield the end reward, you cannot lose in the entire 9 matches. I know nobody personally that has actually beat it, and I've only seen very few people on forums that have even beat the Trials of Osiris. It's very difficult, very high level, but I had a ton of fun. This was the most stressed out I've ever been in Destiny. Period. End of story. And I ran Vault of Glass when I was a level 26. This was hard. This took a lot of team coordination, and it feels so much like a cat and mouse game. Bungie has said that the trials are going to be running every weekend, and that's really great. It's going to give players an opportunity to be able to hone their skills during the week and maybe try again during the weekend. However, I do have a few issues with the Trials of Osiris. First off, although I acknowledge that Bungie is trying to create a great endgame for Crucible players, I think it's just way too unforgiving. A lot of players, including myself, are never really going to be able to have the time or effort to put into the trials to eventually get that flawless 9 wins, and so we're never going to be able to see that loot at the end, the loot that we paid for. I think it's a little bit frustrating that Bungie isn't allowing a little more leeway or different opportunities to be able to get this loot. I have a lot of fun with it, but it's just, honestly, too hard to be able to justify not being able to get loot. Secondly, the Trials does not have any sort of matchmaking capabilities. I understand why Bungie has implemented no matchmaking in hard endgame. However, a lot of players who play PvE, a lot of players who are used to their raid groups, don't play Crucible very often. So these groups are not going to be very good. Secondly, a lot of people who play PvE don't really mess with Crucible in the first place. This makes it hard to be able to find people to play Trials of Osiris with. Don't get me wrong, the Trials takes a lot of team coordination, and it is a high skill level. However, I don't think this would have been an issue with matchmaking. I myself played with randoms. I just went on an LFG forum and found players to play with, and we played completely fine. Obviously, we didn't win every game, but even if you have the greatest team, chances are you're not going to win every game. I really think that the Trials needs to add a multiplayer element in order to not lock out so many players, in which is already a pretty alienating game mode.
Imprison me, yes. Fight and win.
In the end, if you're someone who didn't really like Destiny, the House of Wolves is not going to really convince you otherwise. However, if you're someone like me who has a great time with the game but got tired of the same old, pick up the House of Wolves. Bungie has learned from their mistakes. They understand that they can't charge you $20 for an expansion and not deliver on every front, so they have delivered on every front with the House of Wolves. If you like PvE, there's a lot in store for you. The story missions are a lot more numerous, a lot more diverse, and a lot more enjoyable than the Dark Below. Also, the Prison of Elders is just a damn good time. It's a great deviation from the typical wash and repeat raid, and I personally think it's the best thing to come to Destiny on the PvE front since the launch of the game. On the Crucible side of things, the new maps are great, especially the Widow's Court, as I mentioned before. Also, the Trials of Osiris, though a bit alienating to newcomers, is just a great time and is very, very frenetic and offers a different sort of experience in the Crucible. Although the game is a little alienating to solo players, and definitely is not inviting to players who are brand new to the game, the House of Wolves delivers to players on Destiny who have been playing since the beginning and who have wanted more from the game. If the House of Wolves is any sort of glimpse into Destiny's future, then the future is bright. Bungie is obviously listening to the fans and delivering on what they want to see. The House of Wolves is a different, new, and enriching experience in Destiny, and I can't wait to see more. As a final verdict, and with a very strong score of 8 out of 10, the House of Wolves gets a full price recommendation. If you like Destiny, you are going to like the House of Wolves.